Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. This week, the patrons made their voices known, so we're directing our gaze back to the world of Duel Terminal. But we're not looking at age 1.0 or even 2.0. We're going far into the future to talk about one of the 3 new archetypes that sought to redefine how we use the extra deck, presenting the Synchro candidate, Zing. Premiering in the August 2014 core set, Duelist Alliance, not only did these majestic noodles breathe new life into how we use tuners and non-tuners, they also introduced the worm typing, because presumably the development team wanted to print more dragons, but wanted to avoid making everything work with all the current dragon support. Despite what Dragon Link players, and Joey Wheeler might have you believe,
Black Metal Dragon! I equip Black Metal Dragon on Red Black Metal Dragon's effect adds a card to my hand. Metal Dragon!
Anyways, there's only so many times we can see Black Metal Dragon before we chuck it across the room in frustration. These monsters draw inspiration from the 9 Sons of the Dragon in question being the Dragon King, a Han Chinese deity with dominion over water from rivers to rainfall. That includes weather, so they command some pretty fearsome power. So, as their direct descendants, the Zing are no joke. In the Duel Terminal story at the end of Age 2.0 and the defeat of Sophia, Constellar Sombre and Evil Swarm Kirkion, who had absorbed the powers of destruction and creation that she had held dominion over, noticed that their powers were waning, and believed that the sister goddess Tiara, who had been sealed long ago by Sophia, was trying to escape. In an attempt to access the planet Sephiroth system, which would help ensure Tiara would stay sealed away, Sombre used the 8 Pyrazine cores of the Fallen Gem Knights, including the one that Sombre had back when they were Seraphinite, to harness the ley lines of the planet, forming the Zings. But how do these spirits of the earth play out in paper? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today. We'll scour the earth for our wiggly worms, establish their ley lines of play, then tutor up some tough customers to help save the planet. It's time to sync up with Zing. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons and the fine people over at Dragon Shield. If you want to protect your cards with the strongest scales on the market that even come with their own lore while supporting the channel, use my affiliate link in the description. So what's the deal with Zings? Well, they're a series of worm monsters of various attributes, and when destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the grave, the main deck ones can special summon a different Zing monster from your main deck. Each one has a particular position it has to summon in, but a good rule of thumb is that it always summons in the position that it has the 0 battle stat in. For instance, Pulao has 0 attack, so its effect will summon in attack position, while Suan Ni floats into defense position since it has 0 defense, with Chi Wun not caring because both its stats are 0. But be careful, these do miss timing, so keep in mind when you use your own destruction effects so you don't miss out on any value. Dividing them even further, the main deck tuners have effects that help put the material on board necessary to perform synchro summons, while the non-tuner main deck monsters can perform a quick synchro on your opponent's main or battle phase, as well as applying an additional effect to any synchro monster they're used as material for, whether they're on or off theme. And they do stack, so the more you can fit into the equation, the better. In fact, this was Zing's claim to fame back in the day. Not only could you drop bomb monsters out of nowhere, you were effectively remixing older synchros to help them meet a modern meta, or modern at the time. A popular example would be Stardust Dragon. Its protection effect is pretty useful, but an easy way to get through it was just summoning something bigger than it. But make it with Beyond, and now Battle Destruction is no longer on the menu. And it's one of those kinds of effects that are applied to monsters, but it's not its own effect. So things like Skill Drain and Effect Veiler won't do a darn thing against it. Let's start things off with the one that ties it all together, Chi Wun, Light of the Zing, a level 1 light tuner monster with 0 attack and defense, and when any number of Zing monsters you control are destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the grave, while this card is in the grave, you can special summon this card, and if you do, banish it when it leaves the field. But this effect and its floating effect are mutually exclusive, meaning you can only activate 1 per turn and only once per turn. Basically, if any of your Zings float, Chi Wun rises from the grave to join them, giving you the tuner and non-tuner you need to get the job done. It also means you potentially get 2 tuners for the price of 1, since you can sync with it regularly, reborn Chi Wun when your floating effect occurs, then sync with it again. Chi whiz. Pulao, Wind of the Yang Zing, is a level 1 wind monster with 0 attack and 1800 defense, and a synchro monster that uses this card as material is unaffected by spell card effects. That includes your own, so feel free to let loose with all the Darkholes you want. That might seem strange to use in a world where Raigeki is at 3, but Darkhole does a great job of enabling your own replacement effects, especially if you have multiple Yang Zings. While they do miss timing, technically they all met their activation condition at the same time, and there was nothing to cause them to miss timing, so they'll all go at the same time, which might even let you chain block some of your more important ones. And if you pair that with a synchro that's been made by Pulao, well, now it's going to dodge that destruction so you get all the benefits and your opponent loses a bunch of monsters. And it's nice that, as a level 1, it can fit into a lot of different equations for a lot of different synchros, giving them the superpower of not being able to put letters together correctly. You know, because they can't spell. Bishi, Water of the Yang Zing, is a level 2 water monster with 0 attack and 2000 defense, and a synchro monster that uses this monster as material is unaffected by trap card effects. A lot of what I said about Pulao applies here as well, though replace Darkhole with Torrential Tribute. Both of these cards make for great additions to the theme to wipe away your opponent's field while keeping your own intact, with Darkhole being more proactive and Torrential being reactive. But it also helps against a bevy of cards like Infinite Impermanence, or the Trap Hole cards you're likely to see thanks to the recent Trap Trick structure deck. So if you're worried your opponent's back row is going to be an issue, just make a big monster with Bishi and turtle up. Jiao 2, Darkness of the Yang Zing, is a level 2 Dark Tuner monster with 0 attack and 2000 defense, and if you control no other monsters, you can send 2 Yang Zing cards from your hand to the grave to special summon a Yang Zing monster with 0 attack and a Yang Zing with 0 defense from your deck, but banish them during the end phase. And this is also mutually exclusive with its floating effect. This is a high-risk, high-reward card for the theme. It goes net neutral in card advantage, converting ones in hand into on-field presence, which you can use to jumpstart your synchro summons. But since you send the cards as cost, a single piece of effect negation can turn this startup into a full stop. And that's even before Ash Blossom existed. It's a powerful effect, but one I wouldn't put much stock in, especially in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It's almost as much of a mistake as letting Bishi get corrupted by the powers of the Shadolls. A real big misplay from the good guys on this one. Beyond, Earth of the Yang Zing is a level 3 Earth monster with 1600 attack and 0 defense, and a synchro monster that uses this card as material can't be destroyed by battle. A pretty innocuous effect, especially nowadays with removal being so easily accessible, but in the right circumstances it can still be outrageously powerful. While Stardust was my go-to example earlier in the video, Beyond plus any level 1 tuner makes Herald of the Arclight. As far as problem synchro monsters go, it was even more common to use the battle phase to out this little orb with legs. But with this terrific tiger, your opponent's not going to have the option anymore. And in a simplified game state where both players are scrambling to find a winning position, having a monster that turns off one of the fundamental rules of combat isn't anything to turn your nose up at. Just don't tell Tiger Dragon that the Yang Zings are copying their aesthetic. I don't think that'll end very well. Zephyr Shi, Treasure of the Yang Zing, is a level 3 Earth Pendulum monster with 1500 attack and 0 defense and a scale of 1. As a pendulum spell, it has the usual Zephyr restriction of only allowing you to pendulum summon Zephyr and Yang Zing monsters, an effect that can't be negated, and if this card is pendulum summoned or special summoned from the main deck, you can target a Yang Zing or Zephyr monster you control, except a copy of this card, and that monster is treated as a tuner for that turn. Also place this card on the bottom of the deck when it leaves the field. Yeah, I guess they didn't want you to have a repeatable tuner from the extra deck just yet. This is honestly a pretty neat one-of card to have in your deck, as it allows you to be a lot more flexible with the monsters you can use as synchro material. Then it just goes right back into the deck to be summoned later, and you're going to want to play it as a one-of since it doesn't have the usual floating effect. Though admittedly, one that requires you to go to the grave would be pretty hard to achieve when you're printed as a pendulum monster. It may not look very valuable thanks to its flat color palette, but remember that the real treasure is the synchro material we tuned along the way. Suwan Ni, Fire of the Yang Zing, is a level 4 fire monster with 1900 attack and 0 defense, and a synchro monster that uses this card as synchro material gains 500 attack and defense. Now, out of all of our options, this is probably my favorite. Some monsters just do not cut the mustard purely because of their low stats. Heck, even some great monsters can be pushed out of consideration even with good battle stats, just because they're a hair shy of running over established threats. For instance, Crimson Blader can be a huge boon when it comes to dealing with Sword Soul, and with Suwan Ni, it actually clears Chixiao, keeping your opponent from accessing their synchros on subsequent turns. And you can even make it more difficult for them to deploy Vishuddha and Ashuna. It also gives better offensive power to High Speed Roid Chanbara, Stardust Charge Warrior, Warrior, Goyo Guardian, and probably my favorite, Thought Ruler Archfiend. And Ra help you if you manage to make a level 9 or higher Synchro Monster using 2 Suwani as material. That'll really get things fired up. Daotia, Shadow of the Yang Zing, is a level 5 Dark Monster with 2200 attack and 0 defense, and the possession of a Synchro Monster that uses this card as material cannot switch. On the surface, this protects your cards from Change of Heart or Crackdown, but it's actually way better. Anything that would put this card under your opponent's jurisdiction just doesn't work, so that includes being absorbed as Xyz material, or being attached as an equip card. It's a rather niche situation, I'll grant you that, but with Gold Pride Pin Baller running around, it's something you're going to want to keep in mind. But besides that, it's a pretty beefy monster you can summon off of your floating effects, so once again, not a bad idea to keep at least one in reserve, just in case, even if it is overshadowed by the rest of the crew. Zephreniu, Secret of the Yang Zing, is a level 6 Earth Pendulum monster with 0 attack and 2600 defense with a scale of 7. Its pendulum spell effect is the same as Zephyr-Shi, and as a monster, when pendulum summoned or when destroyed by a battle or card effect while in the monster zone, you can add a Yang Zing or Zephyr spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. This represents probably the most powerful monster of either the Yang Zing or Zephyr archetype, as accessing your spell and trap cards is stupendously powerful, and while it doesn't provide any extra effects, being a non-tuner level 6 helps you get your big synchros out fast. You'll see why our support cards are so important in a later section, but for now, we'll just keep it our little secret. Alright, that about does it for the main deck monsters. Now it's time for the extra deck goodies. Danglong, First of the Yang Zing, is a level 5 light synchro tuner monster with 0 attack and 2800 defense, requiring generic material. If this card is special summoned, you can add a Yang Zing card from your deck to your hand. And once per turn, you can send a worm type monster from your deck to the grave, and this card's level becomes the sent monster's level. And if this face-up card leaves the field, you can special summon a Yang Zing monster from your deck. Now, this might all sound pretty familiar if you've watched my video on Roll Chalice, and that's because that wasn't the first time they introduced a level 5 Synchro Tuner monster that searches you a card on summon and summons a monster when it leaves the field. This is the original mistake. And spoilers, this card is also banned. Well, I mean, it was banned when I wrote this script, then the May 2023 ban list hit to mess with me specifically. Historically, because Danglong's material are completely generic, you'd throw a few Yang Zings into a deck that just makes level 5 synchros easily. And for your troubles, you'd get 2 Omni Negates off of a single monster. It's also a huge boon to Dino players because this was one of their best tools for extension, and that was, I must stress, before it was banned a long time ago. I'm frightened to see what kinds of new things people are going to do with them nowadays. Not only are there a bunch of new dinosaur cards coming out, we might find new usages for the oft-forgotten banish effect of the Sword Soul spell cards to modulate your cards around to use this in that deck. Suffice it to say, the return of this outrageous enabler is going to have a lot of implications moving forward, and for some of you, it's going to be a breath of fresh air right for your dang lungs. Yatza, Evil of the Yang Zing, is a level 7 Dark Synchro monster with 2600 attack and 2100 defense, requiring generic material. It can't be targeted by your opponent's card effects, and you can target a Yang Zing monster you control and a card your opponent controls and destroy them. And when this card you control is destroyed by a battle or card effect and sent to the grave, you can special summon any worm monster from your deck in defense position. You've probably seen this monster around the block once or twice, and that's because, despite being almost a decade old, its design has a lot of evergreen components. Generic level 7 synchros have been a staple of the competitive scene, especially after the release of Destrudo, and popping your own cards to remove your opponents has been a time-honored tradition since the days of Scrap Dragon. But what really puts it over the top is its replacement effect. For any deck that can make it, Yatzo represents the removal of any targetable card and the summon of any worm monster from your deck. Now, at release, the pool of monsters you could draw from was pretty shallow, but with the advent of decks like Tenyi, Virtual World, and Sword Soul, Yatza's toolbox is currently stronger and more broad than it's ever been. And that's just when it's being used generically. In a dedicated build, you're essentially getting destructions for free by cycling through your Yang Zings, and by making this with Suwani, this becomes a combat menace on top of a field shredder. It's a really good card, as long as you can get over the moral compunctions of using yet another corrupted Yang Zing. However, some might say that winning a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a matter beyond good and evil. Bashia, Brightness of the Yang Zing, is a level 8 light synchro monster with 2300 attack and 2600 defense, requiring a tuner and one or more non-tuner worm monsters as material. When this card is synchro summoned, you can target cards on the field up to the number of different original attributes of worm monsters used for this card's synchro summon and shuffle them into the deck. And once per turn, you can target a card you control and a level 4 or lower monster in your grave. Destroy that card on the field, and if you do, special summon that other monster from your grave. This is one of the cornerstone monsters of the entire archetype, and for good reason. You're already incentivized to make your synchros with as many Yang Zings as possible to pile on the effects, and Bashia multiplies that to the extreme. For instance, if you manage to make this with what appears to be its component parts, Chi-Wun, Bion, and Suani, you not only get a 2800 attack reanimation engine that can't be destroyed by battle, you get to shuffle up to 3 cards on the field back into the deck. And yeah, the revival part is fantastic too. It's worded in such a way that keeps the Yang Zings from missing timing, you get back any level 4 lower monster from your grave, and you can float into any Yang Zing you want. This is particularly helpful in reviving Chi-Wun, because while it can do so by itself in a pinch, reviving it with Bashia avoids the self-banishing condition, and unlike Xyz, we don't have a fancy way around that. And you don't just have to pop monsters. You can pop any floodgate that you have lying around, or any other back row that would benefit from being destroyed. So in an archetype that's being assailed by the forces of darkness and corruption, Bashia is a bright spot on the theme. Chao Feng, Phantom of the Yang Zing, is a level 9 light synchro monster with 2800 attack and 2200 defense, requiring generic material. While this synchro summoned card is on the field, your opponent can't activate the effects of monsters with the same original attribute as the Yang Zing monsters used as material for this card's summon. When this synchro summoned card is destroyed by a battle or card effect and sent to the grave, you can add a tuner monster from your deck to your hand. And once per turn, when any number of monsters your opponent controls are destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon a worm monster from your deck in defense position, whose original attribute matches the original attribute of one of the destroyed monsters while it was on the field. Now, this is a problem card, no two ways around it. It's actually a predecessor to another very problematic number 9 themed worm monster, true king of all calamities. I'm only just now putting those pieces together, and now I'm going on another gigantic lore rabbit hole. But to keep things on track, the more varied attributes of Yang Zings you put into it, the more monsters that are just shut down. And it makes no distinction about where those monsters are from. Even just by using Chi-Wun as the tuner, you're cutting off access to some of the game's most powerful hand traps, like Effect Veiler, Nibiru, Ghost Ogre, and Snow Rabbit, as well as Psyframe Gear Gamma. I guess this one isn't banned, but it's not gonna see quite as much play. What is with Konami messing with my scripts after I write them? Anyway, add Daotia into the mix and now the entire Chaos roster has been brought to heel. And if you know your matchup well enough, you can make Chao Feng with the appropriate material to just shut him out of the game. Even if a deck isn't mono attribute, even 1 or 2 attributes being removed can shut down optimal lines of play. Now the good news is that the material has to be a Yang Zing to cause that shutoff. The bad news is that people have found ways to weave 1 or 2 copies of those cards into their decks, a process that's been made even easier thanks to more modern worm support. Everything else about this card is really just icing on the cake. The incidental tuner search and worm summon aren't really accounted for when using this, it's all about the floodgate. So if you make frequent use of this, don't be surprised if your friend group ghosts you. That does it for the monsters. Now it's time for our spells and traps. Yang Zing Path is a normal spell card that targets 3 Yang Zing monsters in your grave, shuffles them into your deck, then draws 2 cards. Once again, we found ourselves with our archetypal draw 2 spell, but this one isn't like the others. Normally, these are meant to dig you deeper into your deck while jumpstarting your engine, but Path is more about recycling and resetting that engine, meaning you only get rewarded after your game plan is online. This makes Path pretty weak as far as draw spells go, especially because this can be punished in the exact same way as Pot of Avarice, a card this takes clear inspiration from. But with the amount of monsters you'll churn through over the course of the game, it's nice that you have a way to keep them in rotation, even if, in the modern game, I wouldn't say this is the path forward. Yang Zing Prana is a continuous spell card that gains effects depending on the number of different attributes of Yang Zings in your grave. With 2 or more, all Yang Zing monsters you control gain 500 attack. With 3 or more, if any number of your Yang Zing monsters you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can send this card to the grave instead. With 4 or more, your opponent can't set monsters, and you change all face-up monsters your opponent controls to attack position. And with 5 or more, you can send this card to the grave to destroy all cards on the field. The scaling power level of this card makes it very interesting. even at low investment, a 500 attack buff is pretty nice, but I don't think it really carries the card enough to see play. Being a board wipe is pretty cool, especially since our monsters float, but by the time you get to 5 attributes, it might be too late, especially now that destruction is becoming less and less appealing as time goes on. The anti-set effect is still pretty cool though, since it keeps your opponent's monsters in attack position, letting you crash your Yang Zings into them so you can shuffle them into whichever one you need, and has extra value in case face-down monsters are relevant in a particular format. And the destruction protection can be helpful in keeping your Synchro Monsters from getting removed. If all of these were just inherent functions of the card, this would be pretty fantastic, but with the setup required without any immediate benefit to our engine, it was hard to consider playing even on release. Look, I'd love to give this a passing grade, and I know I'm maybe a little overly positive on a few things, but I have to draw the ley line somewhere. Yang Zing
Brutality
is a normal trap card that you can activate if a Yang Zing monster you control battles an opponent's monster during damage calculation. Your battling monster's attack and defense each become double its original attack and defense during that damage calculation only, but it's destroyed at the end of the damage step. So you can use this to run over a big monster you'd otherwise have trouble with while still getting your floating effects. Suwani ends up contesting a 3800 attack monster, which is pretty respectable when it comes to cleaning out enemies, and could potentially lead to a lot of damage. But because you can only use this in such narrow applications, for example, you can't push for game with this on an open board or activate it in response to removal, it doesn't exactly see a lot of play. The best case scenario is that you can use this with Yugioh to take advantage of its huge base attack stats while still getting in a good float. It's a little heartless, but sometimes in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's all about who's willing to brute force a solution. Yang Zing Creation is a continuous trap card, and once per turn, if any number of monsters are destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can special summon a Yang Zing monster from your deck, but you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck while this card is on the field, except Synchro Monsters. This was another big card for the theme, as it added another Yang Zing summon off of your floating effects, and the best part was that it didn't even care if the destroyed monster was on theme or not. This makes it so you can play off-theme cards that have some synergy, while still allowing you to use them to access your main game plan. It's pretty sweet. And while each copy is once per turn, it's not a hard once per turn, so multiple creations will stack to give you more Yang Zing summons. But it does come with some very heavy deck building restrictions. This is even more prevalent now that Link monsters are around, but even at the time this shut off pendulum summons from the extra deck, which means if you want to utilize the Zephyr support to its fullest, you actually can't play this. Honestly, as times have gone on, it creates more problems than it solves. Yang Zing Unleashed is a continuous trap card, and while face up on the field, all monsters your opponent controls must attack if able. During either player's main phase or battle phase, you can send this face-up card from the spell and trap zone to the grave to immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon a monster using one or more Yang Zing monsters you control as synchro material. So now your opponent is forced to run into your worms, giving you ample opportunity to float into the material that you need, and it provides another way to quick sync. Not only does this give you the opportunity to use it on your opponent's turn if you have tuners but none of your on-theme non-tuners, it works during either player's main or battle phase, making this the El Shaddai fusion of syncing. You can rush in with Suwanis and Beyonds, then turn them into synchros at your discretion to go in for even more damage. But its power is, once again, hampered by it being a trap card, so the El Shaddai fusion analogy isn't entirely apt, but it still fulfills some interesting niches, so without it, you wouldn't be able to unleash the deck's full potential. 9 Pillars of the Yang Zing is a counter trap card that can be activated in response to a spell card, trap card, or monster effect activation while you control a Yang Zing card. You can negate the activation, and if you do, shuffle that card into the deck, then destroy one other Yang Zing card you control. So yeah, now you have access to an Omni Negate, and it works really well with us. Since the destruction is the last thing to happen, as long as this was resolved at Chain Link 2, you'll get to float with the Yang Zing you popped. Or at least, generally you wouldn't have to worry about that, but in a striking departure from the norm, Denglong actually doesn't miss timing, and this is as good a time as any for a bit of a history lesson. Remember how I said that Denglong represented 2 Omni Negates? Well, this is the first, which you can get via Deng's search effect. Then when you use it, Denglong's Leave the Field effect comes in, letting you summon Beyond from your deck, and since Chi 1 is in the grave because Denglong would send it there for its level modulation effect, you can revive it, then use Beyond's Quick Sync effect, to make that Herald of the Arclight that can't be destroyed by battle. And that's arguably even worse than an Omni Negate, because until you deal with it, it also locks down any effect that needs to send monsters from the hand or main deck to the grave. So, with Denglong hitting the scene, prepare to see this fairly often if its usage takes off. In fact, you could say it's one of the main pillars of its playability. Alright, that covers all the Yang Zing cards, but what do we do with them? Well, like another archetype we've covered previously, Vanadium, these worms are really more of a vessel for synchro summoning than being a group of cards with a cohesive game plan. So instead, we'll be focusing on cards that enable Yang Zings to do the best they can. So what can we play to help them out? Well, one of the first genres of decks that began to utilize Yang Zing was synchro plants. Their floating bodies and extra effects gave their bosses a lot more utility, but as history shows, it wasn't enough to help them break into the meta. But the far more interesting pairing came along when metal foes hit the scene. Because their scales effects wouldn't cause the Yang Zings to miss timing, you could pop them to grab your spells and traps, while the Yang Zings floated into whatever you wanted. Though more often than not it would be the tuners to pair with all your normal pendulums, which just so happened to make some of the sickest Metaphys Horse resolutions I've ever seen. But one of the best pieces of Yang Zing support that I've ever seen came out just recently and has been the focus of a lot of lore videos in the past year, Visas Starfrost. Without running any additional bricks, you have a monster that triggers the floating effects of your Yang Zings and acts as a level 6 tuner to boot. This gives us access to anything generically available from level 7 to 11, including all of your on-theme synchro monsters. Summon Bishi to make Bashia, summon Pulao to make Yazi, or summon Beyond to make Chao Feng. An excellent choice against any super heavy samurai decks you might run into. Prime Heart might be a little difficult to access, but if you play Jiao 2, you can make Amritara, and that gives you access to a wealth of cards from Scareclaw, Tearlaments, and Vanadium. And since that last one is synchro focused, you might find some new friends here as well. Abscission is, really good. Speaking of synchros, the worm type seems to be flush with archetypes that love to synchro summon. Tenyi have access to a tuner and a lot of free material, and they were already making great use of Bashia. And Shaman is a great way to recycle said Bashia and Yazi. You can even do some funny stuff where you can make Scrap Archfiend or Gaia Knight the Force of Earth, specifically because they're non-effect monsters, but still get them extra bonuses thanks to the Yang Zings. It's super cool. The more prominent one has to be Sword Soul. They've also dipped into the Yang Zing synchro pool from time to time, and while these mountaintop sages of the sword benefit from it greatly, I'm not sure if Yang Zings have a place in their deck. Your normal summon is already pretty much taken up by just getting them onto the field, so you'd have a conflict between getting out a Noodle or Moye. And I'll give you one guess as to who I'd rather get into rotation. But because Sword Soul has borrowed so much from Yang Zing, we can do the reverse as well. Qi Zhao is already pretty spectacular, but add even more attack or immunity to spells or traps, and you've got a real keeper. And you can use its effect to grab Sword Soul Blackout, removal that also procs your Yang Zings. That gets you a big body that can negate monster effects, and if you banish Blackout with it after you've resolved it, then that's a free token to help with your next synchro. As for generic worm support, Waterfall of Dragon Soul is either a Rhoda for the type, or can trade in a number of worms to draw you that many cards +1. And for us, we can easily recycle those monsters with Path. Vessel of the Dragon Cycle is a great way to set up Chi 1, and if you're on Tenyi, it's also a Rhoda with the right setup. Heavenly Dragon Circle is similar in that regard, letting you trade out a worm for any other worm. The True Kings are a funny consideration. I'm going to blaze past this section because the lore brain is already tingling, but be careful with their application. The Yang Zings only float if you control them, so while their summon effect wouldn't cause them to miss timing, you won't get the benefits of any that you destroy in hand. Yadza has a lot of targets to choose from, but probably the best and most infamous of all is Mare Mare. This level 7 worm tuner has the vaunted thrice per turn restriction that can help you make a variety of synchros, even the ones that require 3 or more monsters like Trishula. As for a silly tech pick, when it comes to archetypes that span the entire attribute spectrum, I can't help but think of Elemental Grace Doriado. Once you've gotten the entire cycle into the grave, you have a 3000 attack and defense monster that can banish any 3 monsters from your grave to negate and destroy any inherent summon as many times per turn as you have fuel. And since the Tenyi builds have no problem spitting out link material, pair this with Mech Knight Crusadia Avramax, and your opponent's gonna have a tough time making anything stick when they don't have the option to run this over in battle. And that's all I have to say about Yang Zings. I love when Yu-Gi-Oh! Experiments with some of its core concepts, and Yang Zings were one of the biggest experiments at the time. While some Xyz material have been doing something similar for some time now, this was the first time that Synchros attempted something like this along these lines and at this scale. And while they haven't seen widespread usage outside of a few power cards, the fact that they're still seeing play to this day is proof of their latent power. All it takes is the right deck and the right duelist to tap into the power of the ley lines, and if that person's you're about to open up a can of worms. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are Yang Zings gonna climb to the top of the synchro ladder, or are they destined to live in the shadows of other themes for a long, long time? And which one is your favorite? I've got a special place in my heart for Suwon-E, it just looks so cool. Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode was brought to you in part by Dragon Shield. When you want to protect your cards with the power of dragon scales, get some sweet lore for them, and support the channel, check out my link in the description to get started. Today's episode was also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commander Green Knight, Nebula Navigator's 3rd Dynasty, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Andrew Newman, A Random Pup, Avi Chali, Kane Senpai, Chibi Gohan, Danny Bound, Divine Dragon Felgrand 4123, Eric, Aaron the World Breaker, Frankie, Genesis Yu-Gi-Oh!, Gloomba 331, Great Big Pillock, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Howling Zangetsu, Iskander 711, John, Jordan, Julius Sneezer, Mana Charge, Marluxia's a Girl, Nathan Vig, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sammy Haim, Sir Knight JCB, Skybuster Leo, Sophie, apparently, the Fresh Prince of Con Air, the Wizard Moose and Xander Wolfensberger, Cosmic Crusaders Almento 5010, Ariel Kersey, Bear Sharktopus Studios, Beluga Masta, Blue Gem, Chaz Ghost, Chris Kessler, Drachenwald, Emony, Eva Padilla, Herbal D, In the House Like Carpet, Inblink, Gesture Designs, Kale the Dragon, Carp, Kevon Public, King Scarlet Yu-Gi-Oh!, Lord Whoop-De-Doo, Manga Pages, Marion James E. Picata, Matt Simmons, Mega Combi, Michael Shimabukuro, Nadia McCarthy, Nitromo, Ruxith Sarani, Shizuki Nijimura, Star-Lord 777, Stephen Williamson, The Legendary Raven, Tucker Ordorn, and Zal Dureka, as well as the lovely Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to be a part of these credits, get my videos early, join in on the monthly custom card review stream, and, of course, support the channel, please consider checking out the link to my Patreon in the description or becoming a YouTube member. And if you'd like to see another video about the many dragons of the earth, check out this video I made covering Tenyi. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.